The bias grain stretches, which means you don't shape the pattern as much to your body using darts because the fabric will stretch over your bumps, but can you actually remove the darts? Hi, welcome to Pattern Making with Leigh. I worked as a pattern maker in the industry for over a decade for designers like Alexander McQueen and Jenny Packham, and I always thought you couldn't remove the bust and waist darts and have a fitted dress with the woven fabrics, but I was wrong.
Sculpt did it numerous times on bias dresses in their fall 2025 couture collection.
The only way I think they could do this is they got the fabric, cut it on the bias, then put it on a mannequin and got a steamer and mold it into shape. You'd be surprised how much fabric can mold, especially on the bias. It would take a long time and a lot of skill to do this, which is why part of their couture collection. So what usually happens when you remove darts is you get a lot of excess,
which can look pretty boxy and saggy, especially on the back. The excess is really obvious on silk satin fabrics too, which is very common fabric for bias cut dresses.
There's nothing technically wrong with these patterns, but they don't fit nicely. So let's look at some ways you can remove or reduce the darts and create a beautiful bias dress that skims over the body and is really flattering. And these solutions are part pattern making, part design choices.
The bust dart on a torso block creates shaping for the bust, while the waist dart removes excess within the pattern at the waist and works with the side seam to sculpt and create the body's hourglass shape.
Because the fabric stretches on the bias, the darts don't need to be as big on bias cut dresses. So the bust dart, you can reduce it by doing a small bust adjustment, which you can learn how to do in this video.
But I would never remove all of the dart using a small bust adjustment technique. See how these dresses are flattening the chest? Imagine these models were a C or a D cut.
So I recommend keeping some bust shaping.
See how much difference a bust dart makes? The dress is so much more flattering and cleaner because the excess around the waist has been removed.
If you don't want a dart, a very common solution is to put an empire style line below the bust and turn the dart excess into gathering.
You may have seen Kendall Jenner in this beautiful row dart dress. You can also keep the dart if you don't want to have any gathering. Once the style line is added, you can then bring the side seam in a bit on the front to remove the waist dart excess. This is why all bias dresses with empire lines always fit so well below the bust. And if you want to learn how to rotate the dart to create gathering, I've made a whole video on how you can do that.
Even if you don't have an empire style line, you can still curve the side seams in a bit to remove the waist dart excess, not all of it though.
And this is really obvious on the back. Some of the dresses look so beautiful and body skimming on the front, then you look at the back and it looks like they haven't really thought about it.
One way to remove excess is to add a centre back seam to your dress. It's also very useful if you want a slit at the centre back or to add a tail to your dress.
See how much better and cleaner the back looks with the centre back seam? Once you add the seam, you can sculpt it to remove some of the waist dart excess too. Not all of it though. See how there is still some excess, but it's so much cleaner.
If you can't get enough or tailored to mirror my channel, I've done a video on how I would drape a bias slip dress. The first half of the video is all about how I would drape it, keeping all those things in mind, so cleaning out the waist dart excess and fitting around the bust and the centre back. And then the second half of the video is how I turn the drape into a pattern, and you can see how the centre back seam and side seams have been sculpted in.
You can also lower the back neck or add a style line across the back of the dress. This allows you to do a couple of things. Firstly, by lowering the back neck, you can remove some of the waist dart excess from the side seam. And if you've got a style line going through it, you can completely close the dart on the top. Then, if you want to, you can rotate the lower half of the waist dart down to the hem to add flare. Make sure you add flare to the side seams too, so the flare is added evenly throughout the pattern.
Lowering the back also means you're less likely to need zips or other fastenings because the neckline is bigger and can get over the hip.
I should mention that making a boxier style with lots of excess does mean you're less likely to need a zip because the waist is the same size as the hip. However, these designs with more fitted silhouettes do manage to remove zips by lowering the neckline at the back or adding a keyhole at the top. I did it! I removed all the darts and I'm pretty embarrassed by how easy this was. All I did was put the fabric on the bias, then really stretch it over the bust along both true biases, so going down and across the bust. I then got my steamer and gave it a bit of a steam. If I was making a pattern, I would draft my style lines onto the fabric, then remove the fabric and trace around it to create my pattern. You would need a mannequin that is your size and shape to do this accurately though. But if you remember my channel, I've done a video on how you can pattern mannequins to your size that you can watch.
It's much easier to do your research and learn from other people's mistakes, so I hope you found this video useful and you got some incredible design ideas for bias dresses. Now let's start pattern making. Next up in my bias series, I'm going to show you how to change your patterns from the straight grain to the bias. This will cover how to adjust the hem after it's dropped and how much you can sculpt in the side seam and center back seam to remove waist out excess, but we'll do more advanced things too, like twisting. And if you think about it, so the bias stretches across the body and down it. If it stretches across, you need to make the pattern smaller, right? Or imagine a skirt, if it's stretching across and dropping down, will the smaller part of the waist then move down to the hip? So would you make it smaller?